Hello, and welcome to Spiritual Conversation, honest and joyful explorations of ideas to help us align with our true spiritual purpose and live our best lives. I am your host, Jacqueline Clare, Mermaid of the Airways, here to take your hand and go on some deep dives together. And today is a special treat of a deep dive. I have invited Corrin Corbin, a dear friend of mine and an End of Life Doula, onto the show. We will be talking about her work and what all that means. But first, I wanted to share with you why I invited Corrin onto the show. So 2020, the reality of death really became a part of our national discourse. You know, death has existed before 2020, believe it or not, but it really became something we were all awakened to this year. And again, it became part of the national discourse in a way I don't know that it ever has been before. But something that I felt was lacking from that discourse, and an incredible opportunity that this whole, COVID situation has brought up is an opportunity to talk about the inevitability of passing on, our passing on and that of our loved ones in a spiritual context, and allowing that to inform how we live, how we treat others, and how we plan for that next phase of our lives and that of others. So that is the opportunity that Corrin and I are seizing here on the podcast today. Corrin holds a Master's of Art degree in both art therapy with a specialization in counseling and in criminal justice. As I've said, she is an end-of-life doula, and she uses art therapy and counseling to assist people not only with accepting death, but also planning for it and coping with the issues that accompany grief. She provides spiritual, logistical, emotional, and mental support to persons approaching end of life, those transitioning through the dying process, as well as their loved ones. She supports all involved, allowing them to be present with their beloved through the process by providing counseling, non-medical support, compassion, and expertise to assist the dying and their families. She also assists people with no current terminal diagnosis with planning medical care, death vigils, funerals, and memorial services. So with that, welcome, Corrin, to the show.
Hi, thank you, Jackie. It's nice to talk to you again.
Yes, it's good to have you. It's good to have you here. So first off, I would just like to have you share with the listeners, like, what is an end-of-life doula? Like, what does that mean, and what does that work look like?
Well, an end-of-life doula, we have many different roles that we take. I personally take the role of a guide, someone who can be by a person's side during that transition into death. I provide companionship for not just the dying, but for the family. Someone there to be, I guess you could say, a little bit more stable, because it's hard for people to see their loved ones dying. And then they worry about having to think about, their funeral, and think about what's going to happen with the person's pets and what's going to happen with the person's belongings. I'm there to be that stable factor in that process. A lot of end-of-life doulas deal specifically with wills and trusts and that side. A lot of us just deal with the medical side, the quasi-medical side. We don't do any medical advising, even though a lot of end-of-life doulas are from the medical field. You get a lot of nurses, especially hospice nurses, who become doulas, but we aren't there to make those medical decisions. We're there to be support. hard time for people, that they need someone who could step back a little from the whole process, because it's not usually our family members. It's not usually our friends. It's someone who is a stranger to us, and we've known them just in this process. And we're able to step back and go, well, I spoke to so-and-so. I spoke to your dying loved one, and this is what they have told me. And we'll have things written down. We'll be able to say, well, they want to have their funeral at this place, and this is what they want done during that funeral. Or this is what they want done with these things. This is where they've kept their will. This is who their lawyer is, just in case the family doesn't know. We will have that information available and be able to say, it's okay, you grieve. That's what your job is as family, to grieve. It's my job as your doula and the doula of the person transitioning to make sure that you are able to grieve in the way you need to, and they are able to pass in the way they feel they need to. And in some cases, just not be alone, just so that person's not alone.
Wow, that's really, really awesome. So many points that you've brought up, like that well, first off, that when a loved one is dying, that it's such an emotional time, that your logic and your thinking when to deal with the practical side of things is probably going to be compromised on some level, even if you're good at compartmentalizing and putting those emotions aside and just like focusing on the practical side. You're still going to be handicapped to a certain degree. And also that's such a lost opportunity to be able to like fully experience what's happening while it's happening, that you're saying goodbye to someone. Like, so it's awesome that you hold that space, both in a practical sense, helping people with the logistical side of it and making sure their loved ones' wishes are honored for their transition. And that you also like hold that space so people can just be there and grieve and like be present, you know, while it's happening.
Right. Because transitioning into death can be not just stressful, but can also be joyful when allowed to be. It's one of the times where, admittedly, because, you know, we're human, we're nothing but human, and we are able to make things overly stressful and dramatic, I guess you could say. And some of the worst fights happen over a deathbed between family members. And it takes the inherent joy and spirituality, and it just damages it. It just completely can damage it. And having someone like a doula who's there going, no, there's no question about what's going to happen next, because your loved one who is passing on has said this is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And making sure that that particular wish is granted, that final wish is granted, so that family members can go, okay, mm-hmm. and can just be with their loved one and be with each other without some of the petty bickering that can happen. Because it is stressful, and some people just forget how to be loved ones mm-hmm. during that time. And part of my job, as I see it, as an End of Life Doula, is to allow people to be able to focus on being family and being friends and love, and finding the joy of going, yeah, it's their time to go, and they're going, you know, there's the old saying of they always go to a better place, but finding the joy in knowing that their loved one is moving on and transitioning, and in that next life, they're advancing with grace and bounty of, for what I believe, God. Mm-hmm.
And that
And
their children and their family are united
yeah,
and loving each other as they sort of wave goodbye instead of bickering over the coffin.
over the yes, over the coffin, and what kind of coffin, and what is
Yeah,
that person going to wear, and over the small things that, in the long run, really aren't going to matter.
true. Right. You know, Corin, on a completely personal tangent, you know, what I said in the intro about 2020 really being this awakening and death becoming a part of the discourse nationally. It's weird to me personally because in January, before really most people even knew about COVID, um, a community member in my small town passed away. And it was, even though she was elderly, you know, and I'm sure this is an old story for you, you've heard this a lot of times, somehow there was no preparation for it.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, her family was like very financially challenged and like we're very shocked at like how expensive, you know, this thing and that thing and you know, trying to get everything together and like totally like sad that she was gone, but like now there's like all this like financial stuff to worry about and where is she going to be buried and oh my gosh, it's so expensive and that sort of
Right.
thing. And it was also you know, in the Baha'i faith there's very specific steps for preparing a body to pass on. We don't embalm preferably, and there's no what do you call it when you get ashes? Sorry.
Oh, cremation.
Yeah, no
Yes, we're not
cremation.
cremated.
We're
Right.
not
Right.
cremated, but the body is washed and wrapped. And I had the bounty. It was kind of rough, but it was for the first time I had the bounty of helping prepare the body, and I've never even seen a dead body before. So it's kind of weird that 2020 like had this theme of death, but I I love that you talk about this as potentially a joyful process and that you use these words like transitioning, that this is a movement to a next level. And even your job title, you know, doulas are usually associated with midwifery and someone being born into this material world. And that for you and for other people in your profession, you are, you know, midwives to someone being born into another life. That's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yes. And yes, it is a old story about people not being prepared to die.
Mhm.
That's but that's as old as death itself. um, it's actually very rare for me to speak to somebody and they go, "Oh yeah, I already know where I'm going to be buried." Even already having a plot or something of that sort.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is, as a Baha'i, knowing that one of the laws is that we're buried within an hour of where we're dying, travel hour of where we die. And so people are like, well, we can't get a plot then. And I'm like, no, actually you can if you find the right place. Because a lot of people, there's a cemetery not far from where I am that he has been schooled by the Baha'is in the area. And he goes, okay, if you buy a plot from me, great. But if you find that you are traveling and that you're a Baha'i who's unable to get back here within that hour's time, it's okay. I will refund your money. And you don't hear that very often from cemeteries. But if you
Mhm.
find the right place, knowing that it's a religious obligation and not just, oh, we changed our mind, but a religious obligation, a lot of them will look at that and go, okay, is it okay if I just keep part of the fee and return the rest? So that kind of preparation can be made for Baha'i. And when it comes to things like embalming, no one has to be embalmed. There is absolutely no law that I know of in any of the states in the United States of America that says a person has to be involved.
Mm-hmm.
It is strictly something that has come along because people like to be able to see the body and, have an open casket and so on and so forth. But nowhere is it written in a law that embalming is necessity.
Sure. It's just like everything else. We bleach our sugar and our flour. We try to make everything look a certain way, or whatever. Always trying to clean it up when there's actually a natural process here.
Yeah. When most of the time it's like having a picture on a casket can work just as well. I mean, God forbid someone has a horrific death where the body cannot be viewed comfortably by the living. That casket is going to be closed anyways.
Right.
That closing of a casket does not take away at all from saying goodbye to a person's loved one. And so having a picture on a casket, a lot of them have pictures anyhow. They'll have an open casket and the next to it will be this great big picture of the person. And so having a casket open or closed doesn't change the ability to mourn and to say that final farewell to a person.
Sure.
And I don't know. I don't even know where to go from there.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I definitely want to talk more about some of the practical side, particularly for family members. And you've already shared some really good points, about preparing, the body and having a photo instead of an open casket if you want, and that sort of thing. But before we go there, I'd like to hear just a little bit more about your own sort of testimonials, your own stories of like actually being there with someone transitioning and what that looks like, and maybe like a standout story for you.
Well, one of my stories that always comes to mind for me is the first time I sat with somebody who was transitioning. I didn't know the person. I was finishing up my master's degree in art therapy, and my internship was with a hospice. And they said, well, why don't you go and sit with this particular person? They're going to die soon. And I had no clue of what to do. I'm like, I don't know you. I don't know this person. And I'm just sitting there and I'm looking at them, and they looked so peaceful, and yet they were still breathing and still alive. And I'm going, I don't know what to do. And that was such a time for me, because I'm like, this should be such a spiritual time for you. This is something that you should have friends and family around you right now. You should, and I kept wanting them to have all these things that they didn't have. And it made me feel bad. And I kind of decided around that time that I would do everything I could to make sure that people had that company. And at one point, one of the nurses had said to me, just knowing that you're in the room is enough for this person who's dying. Just knowing that you're there. They know you're here. Even if their eyes are closed, they know you're here. And having that calming presence is enough. And it moved me. It moved me that their spirit knew that my spirit was there for them. And I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. It needs to be done. They need to have that calming presence where it's not just a family member and, there's not going to worry about any bickering from this particular spirit to theirs. It's just going to be, I'm here for you. I'm here to say farewell. I'm here to help you feel comfortable in leaving this plane and going on to another. And then when I sat with a Baha'i, an older Baha'i who I actually, said one of my second mothers, I sat with her. She was as she was transitioning and passing, and seeing the joy in her face when I was singing to her, because I did a lot more for her, because by that time I had come up with my own ways of being present and holding the space and being joyful with her. And I would sing. I sang every Baha'i song I could think of, and every, almost spiritual song I could think of. And there were times where she would perk up and she would sing with me. And it was fabulous. And
wow.
Just being there and having her go through a time where she would talk about her family members who had already passed. Like, my father's dead, isn't he? And I'm like, yes, he is, because she was already 90 something. And I figured there was no way her father was still alive. So I was like, yes, he's already passed. She's like, yeah, I'm going to go to him. Yeah. And, we had that conversation several times, she and I, about whether her father was alive. And I figured, it's because she was seeing him. And she wanted to make sure that what she was seeing was her father, and that it was her father who had passed and was there for her now. And it was just lovely. And at one point in this, it was myself and my mom and a friend, another great friend. We're sitting there, and we noticed that this lady was looking between us, actually between my mother and myself. And both my mom and I looked to the left and my mom looked to her right, going, no, there's no one standing behind us that we could see. But she started having this conversation with this person. And next thing you know, she lets out this laugh. And it was just fabulous, because it was almost, it wasn't quite a fake laugh, but it was this ha ha ha. It was this perfect ha 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 she did. And we all just started laughing with her. And we were like, whatever they said, she's okay with it. And she was having this conversation with people who weren't us. And it was, oh, her angels are here for her. And she would talk about her angels. And I know she had a background as a Catholic growing up, and she became a Baha'i much later in life. And she actually went back to her Catholic roots all of a sudden, where she wanted me to read I'm not sure, I've forgotten which stanza it is, but it's the one about there as I walk through the valley of death, I shall fear no evil. And she wanted me to say the Lord's Prayer with her at one point, so I pulled it up on thank God for internet and smartphones. I was able to pull it up and find it, and we said the Lord's Prayer together. I don't know how many times I sang Amazing Grace for her. And yet she did the one thing that hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of transitioning people do. She waited until her room was completely empty. I was just about to come and visit her, actually. She waited until everybody had left her room to pass. And that is probably the most common thing that people don't realize. It's like, I want to be there for them. I want to be there for them. And you can be there for them up until a point, because there's going to be a point where that person's going to be like, oh, so-and-so just turned their back and they walked out. I'm going to go now.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah. It is more common than anybody could actually ever believe. That
do you think there's like a sense of like obligation when people are in the room, and that's why they're like holding on and then they let go when they get a chance? Or what do you make of that?
I think that's part of it. I would like to think that that's part of it. But I would also like to think that it's not until the living have said their goodbyes and have taken their own living last breath. It's a metaphorical breath. Because when people are scared for someone, they won't leave their side. But when they finally go, it's okay, they'll walk away for a second and go get a drink of water or something like that. And the person transitioning needs to know that, oh, they're okay with it. They are truly okay with it. because they've walked away. I can
Wow.
go now. It's that the spirit feels the living being okay with the dying going, that the dying can then go, all right, now I can go, because now I know that everyone's okay with it, because that last person just left my room.
Wow. That's fascinating.
And yeah, I would like to think that, that's part of it, where they can feel I don't want to say that we're resigned, that's just has a slight negativity to it, but that we've agreed that they can progress now. Their soul can progress without us feeling the burden that the living always feel. That we've said, it's okay, you can go. We're going to be fine. And we'll prove it by leaving your room.
Wow, that's so interesting. Of course, having this conversation, which by the way, I feel like so hungry for, like, as we're talking, it's just like bringing up just all kinds of memories and stuff. And I feel like I probably have like less experience with death than the average person. Like, I just don't feel like I've known that many people who have passed, but everyone has been extremely significant. And you're reminding me of when my grandmother passed, and we were definitely not estranged, but there had been some challenges in all of our family relationships towards the end of her life. But I knew that she was fading, and so I was very purposeful about calling her once a week. And I even coordinated with my cousins, like, okay, we should each have a day of the week that we call grandma and check in with her. And my day, I can't remember, it was like Wednesday, and I just felt like calling her again on Friday. Like, I just felt like calling her, and I called her, and I sang to her this Southern song. She grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and it was just a sweet, song that a child would sing. And I sang it to her on the phone, and she said, "Jackie, where did you learn that?" And I was like, so like, oh, because of course she taught me the song, And
Right.
I told her, I said, "You taught me, Grandma." And she said, "I know." So she was like teasing me. And it was that same conversation just on the phone. She started we started talking about death. We didn't use the D word, but we were a little euphemistic, but like we were talking about it. And she was asking me what to do. And I was like, I told her, I said, "You can keep fighting or you can let go. Either one is fine." And she said, "Well, what about my grandchildren and my children?" And I said, "We're going to be fine. We're going to be okay." And then she asked me, "What do I do about the fear?" And, it was one of those moments where I just, the angels inspired me. And I said, "Pray and ask God to take it away."
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was my last conversation with her. That night she went into a coma, and then 2 days later she passed. But kind of reminds me, this is a phone call version, but when the dying have that sense of the living have taken the last breath, like, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's that's a very powerful story. It really is. And it's actually, I've heard versions of similar stories. It's almost more normal, I hate to say normal, typical,
Yeah.
than you would expect. There's that one person, that one family member that gets the feeling of, I need to contact her. I need to contact her. I need to speak to this person right now. And they'll do it if they trust their gut. They do it, and then it's usually the last conversation that almost anybody has had with that person. And usually a few days later they die, you know. Yeah. And I like to think that it's that spiritual connection that the dying have with all of us, especially their loved ones,
Yeah.
and that they can reach out and go, hey, a little tap on the shoulder, hey, we might need to talk real quick, just real quick, I just need to. But that last thing about the fear, and that's the one thing I'm still learning about, is how to talk to people about that fear of the unknown, because that's what it is.
Right.
It's not necessarily the fear of the act of dying. It's the fear of what happens when we die. Because that question truly cannot be answered by anyone, because everyone dies and goes on in their own way. And even though you've had people who say, you know, I've had a near-death experience and I saw the light and I came back, they still don't know what actually happens after that light.
Good point.
I mean, it's a near-death experience. It's not the actual death experience here. And, you know, I always have to fall back on what I was raised to believe as a Baha'i and, you know, as my mother's child, of, you know, when you die, you end up in a place that's comfortable for you and as close to God as you've been able to progress as a living person. And then you continue to progress closer to God, even though you've left the material behind you. Your spirit still continues to progress. And that's what I have to hold on to. And it works for me, and hopefully works for others, because that's kind of what I have to tap into. But I also have to find ways, what's challenging for me is finding ways of doing that when I'm working with somebody who may have been an atheist or even just agnostic, and who may not have a spiritual handhold in this world. And working with that population makes things for me, you know, a little dicey sometimes, because I try to hold back from using the name God, and I fall back onto the, you know, the unknowable essence, or hopefully it's somebody I've had a chance to speak with before they've gotten to that transition period.
Right.
Where they've been more cognizant of, you know, the material world and what they want, and have had a chance to go, okay, John Doe, you know, how do you feel about passing on, and, you know, what happens afterwards, and, you know, do you believe we actually go somewhere, or do you believe it's just going to be nothingness? I need to know how to, because I need to know how to speak to them when they're transitioning, and when I'm there holding their hand going, it's okay to go on. It's all right, you know, because it may not be a light for them. It may be darkness for them, but that darkness is comforting for them. And I need to remind them that for them, that darkness is comforting, and it's okay. And that the people, you know, you're leaving behind are going to be okay. And that's a challenge.
Yeah, I bet.
And it's really hard right now, because you were talking about COVID earlier. And it's, oh my gosh. I don't know how other end-of-life doulas are dealing with it. Yeah, I've talked to a few. I have a few friends that are end-of-life doulas as well, or sometimes commonly known as death doulas. I will switch back and forth between the two terms. of Death Doula and End of Life Doula. To me, to all of us, it's the same thing. It's just polite company.
Mm-hmm.
Polite company gets End of Life Doula. Friends and family that know me tend to hear me say Death Doula a lot. But I've spoken to a lot of others, and we're all having a hard time because we're unable to do our work, to do what our spirit leads us to do, because we're not able to be with the dying.
Which is so crazy. I mean, we all understand the reasons, but like this year that you haven't physically, you and all your colleagues, been able to be with family and the transitioning. I guess you can be with family in some cases, but with the transitioning, like, my gosh, that's really rough. And I just want to catch our listeners up that, you have been doing your services online and doing a lot of the preparation work with families to be ready for their transitioning. And you had also told me that due to the restrictions right now, and that somebody going into hospice and any place where they're cut off from their family is like an indefinite being cut off from their family. So you're helping families in some cases explore different possibilities so that they can be with their loved ones. Is that right?
Yes. And I haven't had a chance to walk anyone through this part yet, but trying to impress on people that even though they're in a physical other building of a hospice, that they might consider pulling from that, if that person's imminent, if the transition is imminent, to maybe pull them from that hospice and bring them home, as long as their home is clean. Because in a sense, it almost doesn't matter because that transition is imminent.
Yeah.
And to maybe bring them home and have let them be home with their family. That would be the only way to do it, outside of iPads and iPhones being held up to the person. And so I'm starting to have that conversation with some of the other end of life doulas that I know of. Have you guys tried this? Have you, our hospice is balking at removing the person, when they know that death is completely imminent and there's nothing that's going to stop it. Our hospice is allowing people, they're the ones they're caring for, to leave and go to their family instead of passing in the hospice. So that's one of the things that I'm starting to question, and haven't had to work with anybody with yet. But that's always something I think people should ask when they have a loved one in hospice. It's like, when can we just pull them? Can we just pull them at any time? And if the answer is yes, then that's always a possibility, because there's a whole thing of having home funerals that people also don't think about. A home funeral is, because, how to put it simply, when somebody dies, you do not have to release that shell, that body, to a funeral home. You can always go, that is my mother, she's coming with me.
Wow.
And no one can stop you from doing that. There is no law saying because that person died at such and such, they have to be now given to a funeral home. Some hospices may have standard operating procedures that say, oh no, we're only going to release to, a funeral home or something like that. And that's why I'm like, you need to talk to your funeral home. You need to be prepared for this and talk to your funeral home. Because if you can't convince that hospice to let your loved one, after they've died, come to you, and they have to be released to a funeral home, you have to speak to that funeral home and go, listen, they are going to release them to you, yes, but you are going to bring them to me.
Mm-hmm.
And have that kind of relationship. There are a lot of family-owned funeral homes that will do that. and go, yes, we'll get your mother, your father, your whoever from the hospice because we have to. And instead of turning left to go to the funeral home, we will turn right and come to your home and let you have a home funeral.
It's really, really good to be reminded that there are possibilities, and you just need to be cognizant of these things and advocate for your loved ones, because this is practical, but it's also very sacred, and you have a right to do everything you can to have the parting with your loved ones that you all want.
Yes, and that your loved one would have wanted.
Right.
And possibly, hopefully, has asked for. That is where having a doula, having a end of life doula on the family side can come in very handy, because we know a lot of the funeral home directors. You know, we've had conversations with them. We've had conversations with the cemetery director. We've had, you know, a lot of them were like, especially some of the family-owned funeral homes, love having a doula involved in it, because they know they have someone they can talk to who is not so emotionally caught up in everything.
Right, that makes sense.
And most likely has the plan written out. It makes their job easier, as well as making it easier for the family. Having the logistics, having someone that middle person, having everything makes it easier for everyone involved.
Sure.
And I've had funeral directors work with people who specifically do home funerals, and that's one of the things that I actually do offer as well, is helping families have a home funeral. Now, there are some things that legally I cannot do with a home funeral, or at least I legally cannot charge for with a home funeral, which is preparing the body. That is not something that I, as a doula, or anyone as a doula, an end-of-life doula, can charge for. That is a mortician's job. But a family can prepare their body. It's, you know, the deceased person's family can touch the body as much as they want to. No one can stop that. The only time, you know, I would say not to is if they do die of COVID, or, you know, something that's possibly transmittable. Sure. Yeah. Everyone else's health and safety has to be taken into consideration. But, you know, if someone has just died of natural causes or a heart attack or, you know, something else, that family is allowed to touch that body and be with that body as long as they wish. Yeah. And as long as health and safety is taken into consideration. And having an end-of-life doula who's there and possibly can help with the home funeral, or an end-of-life doula who knows someone who is very well versed in doing home funerals, can get them involved. And cold packs are there, and, you know, that body is kept at a decent temperature so that decomposition is slowed. Sure. You know, you can have your home funeral, and then having, you know, the funeral director, the funeral director or the mortuary come and then take the body and take it on and take it to the cemetery and give it over that way. There are variations to the quote unquote traditional American funeral out there that a lot of people don't know about. Right. And should know about, and should definitely know about, because not everybody wants the cookie cutter funeral.
Right. Well, I thank you for sharing all of that. Like, very, you know, I do think these are things that are hard for people to talk about, and that's one reason why they don't plan for it. And you've really, you know, shown the spotlight on different possibilities, different routes. And, you know, I think that's one of the interesting things about this year and about the whole COVID thing, is that people are exploring all kinds of non-traditional ways to do all kinds of things. Like, there's been, on the one hand, there's this, we've all kind of been forced into certain things that, have made life more restricted. But on the other hand, we've also been like, well, I want my kids to be educated like this, or I want to do this or whatever. So funerals and saying goodbye to your loved ones and burials are no different. So there's many possibilities. And another silver lining, perhaps, of this time, sadly, you are prevented from doing a bulk of your work, actually sitting with people who are transitioning in hospice and stuff, but you can work with people online, which is cool. So people, even outside of Pittsburgh, might be able to consult with you and get your guidance in preparing for their loved ones passing. Is that right?
Yes. And with my practice, I also will provide not just for that time of transitioning, for the families, for that time of transitioning and dealing with it, but I will also stay with a grieving family up for a year.
Wow.
From death. I have decided that I will be available to do that with families up for a year, because I'm also a therapist. Mm-hmm. I'm an art therapist outside of it, so I will provide grief therapy for families, because it does take. I mean, people always go, "How long do I get to grieve?" or "How long do I keep grieving?" You have family members who yell at other family members because they're still grieving over the loss of somebody.
Yeah.
And my answer to that is, you grieve for the rest of your natural life.
Wow.
Grieving never truly ends.
Wow.
We just learn how we learn how to be with our grief is what happens. And a lot of people don't realize that, yes, that first year is tough. And one of the things I try to do is help them not just deal with that first year, but prepare for the next year. A lot of people don't realize that that second year out after losing a loved one is possibly tougher than the first year.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
They think that first year is going to be hard. And yes, it's going to be hard. But what happens in that next year is it's been a full year since someone has died. It's now that birthday that falls after that person's death may happen into that second year. And so it's like, oh God, this is the first Christmas without them. This is the first birthday without them. This is the first anniversary without them. And what's happening is, in that first year, you feel your grief in your heart. And it's your heart that's really, really aching. But then in that second year, it becomes very mental.
Interesting.
And your head, it hits you in your head that, yeah, they really are gone. They really, really, really are gone. And now I'm having to deal with their birthdays and deal with Christmases and Hanukkah and any other religious holy or holiday that pops up. That, Halloween may have been that person's favorite time of year. And now your head is going, oh my gosh, they would have loved to have been here. And it becomes such a mental grief that, it's like, how do I be happy at this time of year? Because we loved this time of year. Oh God, I can't be happy because they're not here. And mentally a person can have a total breakdown again.
Yeah.
It's so hard because it becomes such a mental exercise in trying to be alive without that person in their life.
It totally makes sense. Yeah, I've heard that, and I've never heard it explained so well, like why that is. My gosh, Corrin, we could go on, because now I want to ask you about like the year of bereavement and using art therapy and stuff. So we're going to have another conversation. This was so good. But thank you again for the work you do and for the really practical tips you've given us. Again, Corrin Corbin. Am I saying your name right, Corrin?
The first name, yes, which is surprisingly, because most people mess up my first name.
And how do you say the last name?
Corbin. It has an R in it.
Right. Corbin. I see the
Yeah.
R. I guess I'm just not saying it. Corbin. And
You're the first person to ever mess up my last name. I was sitting here laughing at myself going, I've never had anyone say my last name wrong. I rarely have people say my first name correctly.
that is quite an accomplishment. It's just, inside out, backwards day, I guess. Corbin.
That's why I love you, Jackie.
Groovy.
That's why I love you.
And your business is Lote End of Life Doula Services. And I'm going to have your contact info and all that good stuff in the show notes and in the YouTube description when we put this up there. And two things that I just want to plagiarize from you to close this out is that, you've said to me that you were talking about working with atheists and how that might cause a challenge. And, no matter what you believe and how you've lived, passing on is always a spiritual experience.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. It falls along those lines of there's never, you hear the old saying of there are no atheists in foxholes during a war. It's such a spiritual thing. No matter what anyone tends to believe while they're alive, it changes at the point of death, almost always.
No
I've
doubt.
rarely heard of any of my other end-of-life doula friends saying, oh no, they were completely, non-spiritual at the end. It becomes the spiritual thing at the end, no matter how it is, even if it's just a simple smile. I mean, they actually say a lot of times after someone has died, when you start to clean them, their face actually will change. It will soften. I know it's weird, but I've heard it more than once of when it comes to that point of after they've passed and it's like rigor mortis is even set in. When you actually start that cleaning process, their face softens. And sometimes even a slight smile may appear. And I'm like, if that's not spiritual, I don't know what is.
True. And you've also emphasized, that this happens, like it's gonna happen. So you might as well be prepared for it. And that preparation may in fact help you be less afraid of it and help you see it as this joyful inevitability,
Yeah. I've talked to friends who, they're not thinking about their own death or anything like that, but, they may have a family member who's gotten older, a mother or father who's gotten older, and they're not sure of why they're acting the way they're acting. And I'll look at them and I'll go, because they're older and they know their time is coming and they're a little afraid. And it's okay. It might be simply the fact that it's like, okay, just go and ask your mom, are you scared of dying in the hospital? Is that why you're always so against going to the hospital? And a lot of times the answer is yes.
Right.
And I'm going, these are conversations we need to be having desperately before we're at a point where we can't speak for ourselves. We need to have this conversation of, where do I want to die? Do I want to die in a hospital? I don't want to die in a hospital, or I don't, I would like this to happen, or this, or I don't care. Like with my mom, I love my mom dearly. And I tease her a lot about, dying because she talks about it a lot. And I'm always going, well, okay, you're talking about dying again, which means you failed the test. And she was like, what test? I'm like, the test God's giving you about whether or not you're going to give this up to God and let it be God's decision. You keep failing it because you keep asking for it, and you're going to outlive us all. And yet, at the same time, I'm like, Mom, I'm going to put you in a home. And she's like, okay. So we have conversations about this in a playful way. I'm like, yeah, Mom, I'm going to put you I'm going to make sure you go into a hospice or a home, and I'm just, going to make sure they spray Lysol or, no, not Lysol, it's Pine Sol. Pine Sol. Every once in a while, they're going to clean your room with Pine Sol because she hates the smell of it.
Yeah.
Still look at me and glare at me, and she's like, you know what? I'm not going to care. You go ahead and do whatever you want to. I'm going to die. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to put you in pantyhose when you die. She's like, I don't care. But she hates pantyhose. We have these conversations about things in a playful way, and that's okay. It's not morbid. I really wish people would stop talking about death being morbid. It's not. It's natural.
Yeah.
And we need to communicate with each other and friends and whoever about how we feel about it and
Right.
what we want when it happens, because it's going to happen. Because if someone can figure out how not to die, personally, I want to know that. I want to know. Because I really would like to live forever. I'm
Really?
not saying, yes, it sounds weird coming from an end of life doula, but gosh darn it, I want to know what 30/30 is going to be like. And I want to be human and in my own skin when it happens. I would love to see that.
Super interesting.
I would love to live forever. Make me a vampire, please.
Well, on that bizarre note to end this episode, you do that, Corrin. I'm excited about transitioning when my time comes. But thank you so much for bringing this playfulness to it and helping this be less of a squeamish topic and just something that we can look forward to. I think the Baha'i writings even say that, like, how do you look forward to any journey? Well, you look forward to it with anticipation and happiness and excitement. So I know that's a paradigm shift, but heck, it's 2020. Why not?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, because they said, "Thou art my light, and my light shall never be extinguished."
Yeah.
So why dost thou dread extinction?
Yes, such a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
Well, Corrin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so excited having done this with you. Thank you.
We'll do it again sometime.
Okay.
Hey, podcast listener, I hope you enjoyed my interview with Corrin as much as I did. What a great way to close out our year, remembering that this is, in a sense, the death of a year and the birth of a new one. I will catch you next year, January 5th of 2021. My next episode will be an exploration about consultation as a remedy when we have a failure to communicate. Have a great new year. Bye-bye.